Before the world watched them unravel, before the headlines and the carefully worded statements, there was once an unbreakable bond between Duchess Rowan and Marla Kensington, a friendship forged in the quiet corners of Toronto and the buzzing green rooms of daytime television. Long before royalty changed the rules, the two women moved through life like twin stars, orbiting each other with shared ambition, whispered dreams, and a certain invincibility that only comes when you feel truly seen. Duchess Rowan, back when she was just a rising actress navigating the early seasons of a legal drama, had been introduced to Marla through a mutual stylist. Marla was confident, polished, already influential among the wives of Canada's media elite. But more than anything, she was kind, or at least that's how Rowan saw her then. She knew how to offer compliments that landed like lifelines, how to pull someone in with just the right amount of attention. It wasn't long before their coffee dates turned into weekend stays. And slowly, Rowan began to trust her with a kind of details she rarely spoke aloud. Details about her family, her loneliness, her yearning for something more. When Rowan met Prince Adrian, it was Marla who helped her script the delicate transition from actress to consort. She edited captions, advised on fashion choices that would appeal to both the monarchy and the masses. She showed Rowan how to be public without being exposed. And when the engagement was announced, Marla moved like a silent architect, building support behind the scenes. She arranged discreet dress fittings, coached Rowan through protocol, helped her prepare for the dizzying flash of royal attention. To outsiders, Marla was simply a friend. But within Rowan's inner world, she was everything: mentor, confidant, stylist, strategist, sister. As the royal wedding unfolded in televised grandeur, Marla watched from the inner rows of the historic chapel, not just as a guest, but as someone who had shaped the moment. Cameras lingered on her face, speculating on her role. Insiders knew the truth. Without Marla, the Duchess might never have made it there at all. But as Rowan's life transformed, so too did the rhythm of their friendship. Gradually, their exchanges lost their ease. Phone calls were rescheduled. Texts took longer to answer. There were new advisors, new expectations. Rowan now belonged to something larger: an institution, a platform, a narrative. And slowly, Marla began to feel less like a co-pilot and more like a relic from a past that Rowan was trying to outgrow. She brushed it off at first. Change was natural, after all. But the subtle coldness that crept in with every ignored message, every canceled lunch, began to gnaw at her certainty. What had once been intimate had become curated. What had been private now felt strategic. Marla sensed a shift not just in the friendship, but in Rowan herself. And though nothing had yet broken, the weight of what was unsaid had already begun to fracture the foundation beneath them. In quiet moments, Marla would revisit old voicemails from Rowan full of laughter, silly inside jokes, confessions that now felt like remnants of a vanished version of her friend. She would sit alone in the designer-filled living room they had once decorated together, wondering if loyalty had an expiration date in the world of fame. She didn't know it yet, but the golden circle they had built together was already starting to collapse. It began with a single post, one image, one misjudged caption, shared without hesitation but heavy with consequence. Marla Kensington had always walked a delicate line between fashionable commentary and privileged aloofness. She was used to controlling the narrative, to being the one who advised others on what to say and what not to. But in the summer of that year, when social tensions reached a boiling point across countries and platforms alike, her words landed with a dull, echoing thud, out of touch, dismissive, and to many, deeply offensive. The backlash came swiftly, first as a trickle, then a storm. Influencers unfollowed her. Brand partnerships paused campaigns. A popular activist responded directly, calling her out by name. The internet, insatiable and unrelenting, did what it did best. It dissected, criticized, and amplified. Screenshots spread like wildfire. The comment section turned hostile. Marla, who had once been praised for her charm and diplomacy, found herself cast as a symbol of tone-deaf elitism. Behind closed doors, she panicked. She deleted the post, issued a carefully written apology, and reached out privately to those she felt she had hurt. She crafted statements with legal guidance, trying to walk the line between accountability and self-preservation. But even as the PR damage control team moved into overdrive, Marla knew that one response mattered more than any other: Duchess Rowan's. She waited, hoping for a message, a call, anything that suggested their bond could weather the storm. She had stood by Rowan through every media attack, every painful headline, every leak from the palace. She had held her friend's hand through personal crises and smiled quietly in the shadows so Rowan could shine. And now, in her own moment of need, Marla hoped perhaps naively that loyalty would echo back. But days passed. Then a week. Rowan remained silent. There were rumors that her team was in crisis mode too, evaluating the optics, weighing associations. A single sentence was eventually sent to the press. Duchess Rowan would not be commenting on private matters. It was sterile, cold, strategic. And though it was only a sentence, Marla knew what it meant. She had been cut loose. Friends, she thought, were mutual stopped replying. Invitations were revoked. Whispered speculation followed her at events, when she even dared to show up at all. Reporters stopped calling for quotes. Fashion houses quietly removed her from their outreach lists. Her name, once a quiet asset to any red carpet strategy, became a liability. The part that hurt the most wasn't the loss of status or the deals or the shifting gaze of public opinion. It was Rowan, the sudden absence. The wall that had gone up with no warning, no conversation, no grace. Marla played their old voice memos late at night, listening to the warmth that had once lived in Rowan's voice. Searching for signs of the woman who had once promised they'd grow old as friends. But Rowan had disappeared behind her palace gates and philanthropic endeavors, presenting to the world a polished image unblemished by scandal. The Duchess moved forward with new ventures, new partnerships, new narratives. And Marla was nowhere to be found in any of them. Far away, Prince Adrian watched the unraveling with quiet unease. He had known Marla too, not deeply, but enough to see the role she had played, enough to recognize the absence of compassion. And in the growing silence between him and his wife, he began to wonder if loyalty in their world had become something transactional, temporary. He never voiced these thoughts aloud. But at night, lying awake in the quiet hum of their California home, he wondered whether the next silence might belong to him. Prince Adrian sat alone on the balcony, watching the coastline blur into the horizon as the last traces of twilight disappeared behind the hills. The air was warm but still, the kind of heavy silence that left no room for distraction. He gripped a short glass filled with amber scotch, fingers tightening slightly as the condensation slipped between his knuckles. The world outside still believed in their picture-perfect story, the sunny villa, the smiling children, the grand declarations of freedom and love, but inside the walls of their Californian estate, a different narrative had begun to unfold. Hadn't spoken to Marla since the incident. It wasn't that he had cut her off, but more that her name had become unutterable in the house. Rowan never mentioned her again. Not during meals, not during media meetings, not even when sorting through old photos that Marla had once taken herself. It was as though the woman had never existed. And yet Adrian remembered her laughter echoing through the halls of their wedding week, remembered her calming Rowan before the church doors opened, remembered her as someone who once made his wife feel at ease in the middle of a storm. He began to feel the weight of that silence more acutely. In the early days, he had been so focused on building something new with Rowan far from the control of the firm, from the weight of titles and obligation, that he hadn't questioned much. He followed her lead, trusted her instincts, believed in the mission they had crafted together. But after Marla's sudden erasure, doubt crept in like an old draft beneath a sealed door. He started calling old friends late at night, using a burner phone he kept in the garage under the toolbox. Most were hesitant to speak freely. One of them, a cousin from his school days, warned him gently that everything he said now could end up on someone's desk. Adrian understood the caution. Still, he needed to hear voices that didn't echo back what Rowan's world always affirmed. During meetings with Rowan and their joint PR team, he sat quieter than usual, watching how plans were shaped, how interviews were pre-screened, how narratives were chosen. Rowan had become an expert at it. She spoke with conviction, always on message, her eyes sharp with purpose. But Adrian noticed something else: an absence of warmth, a shift from authenticity to performance. And he began to question whether she even noticed anymore when someone vanished from her circle. One evening, as she spoke on the phone with a foundation executive, Adrian wandered into the nursery, the soft hum of a lullaby playing through the speakers. He looked at his children, peaceful, unaware, and felt a strange ache in his chest. He wanted something more for them. Not luxury or power, just honesty, community, relationships that weren't edited down to brand-safe connections. He tried bringing it up once, during a quiet breakfast. He asked, casually at first, whether they'd heard from Marla. Rowan didn't look up from her phone. She simply said it was best not to revisit what had been handled. Then she returned to scheduling her next speaking engagement. From that moment, Adrian stopped asking, but the question lingered in his mind. If silence had become the new answer for those who faltered, who questioned, who disappointed, how long before he found himself on the other side of it? The divide between them widened, not in arguments but in quiet decisions, separate schedules, solo appearances. Doors closing a little more firmly than before. He remained composed, loyal, visible, but in private moments, Prince Adrian began to retreat inward. And once a man starts questioning the silence around him, he rarely comes back unchanged. It was a sunlit afternoon when Prince Adrian sat beneath the soft glow of studio lights, the carefully curated setting behind him built to suggest comfort, transparency, and warmth. Ferns framed the edge of the shot. A soft blue shirt without a tie, sleeves rolled just enough to appear relaxed but still polished. The camera crew moved quietly, and the producer gave him a thumbs up just before the red light flicked on. He smiled gently, rehearsed, humble, and began to speak. He talked about transformation, about learning, about fatherhood. He spoke of community, of purpose, of the personal growth that came from leaving behind royal life. But not once did he mention the name Marla Kensington. And not once did he veer off the pre-approved narrative that he and Rowan had perfected together. Off camera, he had grown used to pretending that he still believed in the brand they were building, pretending that the choices being made around him reflected his values. The house they lived in, the life they sold to the world, it all looked perfect. But it was increasingly performative, and he knew it. When the interview ended, Adrian rose from his chair and walked off set. In silence, removing the clip mic from his collar with a slow, deliberate motion. Rowan was already on her phone, confirming the next round of press requests, her voice quick and practiced. She barely glanced at him as he passed by. That evening, he packed a small bag, just a few things. A pair of boots, a well-worn notebook, a first edition book his mother had once given him. He told Rowan he was heading north for a few days to visit a friend, someone from the military days who'd built a quiet life on a coastal ranch. She nodded without asking questions, barely pausing in her typing. Up the coast, the world changed. The days passed slowly, without meetings, without makeup artists, without camera crews. Adrian walked among trees, rode horses in the early morning, cooked his own meals. There was no agenda, just space. Silence, yes, but not the kind he had grown used to. This silence wasn't hollow. It was healing. He spent those days thinking not just about Marla, but about himself. About who he had been before he met Rowan, before the spotlight shifted from his brother to him. He remembered what it felt like to be anonymous, to have conversations that weren't recorded or repeated, to exist without being shaped. Meanwhile, Rowan moved on with precision. A new podcast was launched. A photo shoot graced the cover of a prestigious lifestyle magazine. A high-profile charity collaboration was teased online. In every frame she was luminous, alone but empowered. The headlines praised her resilience. No one asked where Adrian was. Marla, too, had begun her own quiet re-emergence. A single article appeared in a Canadian lifestyle publication, a gentle piece about recovery, introspection, and reinvention. Her new fashion line, Unbroken, featured silhouettes that were minimalist and unpolished, a visual departure